Yes, this exhibition came about through a combination of factors. Firstly, I was invited to have the exhibition in this wonderful space by Andrew Nairn, and I received a Creative Scotland Award at the same time, so the two things came naturally together. The work follows through generally with issues concerns that I've had in my work over the past 10 or 15 years, but the bulk of the work in this exhibition has been done within the last 2 years. It follows, broadly the themes that interest me are the history and the social history of the Highlands of Scotland, where I was born and brought up. And as a young age, I went to sea, and I worked as a fisherman, and this background has informed my work and continues to inform it. The other group of works here, titled Objects of Unknown Use, come from an interest in object making, an interest in the Surrealist movement and how the Surrealists have in the past presented objects to you to view and asked you to interpret them as you feel you would like to. So the objects of unknown use are there for you to look at and to make your own interpretation from. I use a wide range of materials and media. I use found objects. I've used materials I've found on the shore, on beaches, stuff that's been reclaimed, stuff that's been given to me, sent to me by friends. And the objects in the cases are a mixture of real objects and found objects and constructed objects. This group of work is called Journey, Journey 1 to 6, 6 different versions of the same idea. It's based in the immigration from the Highlands of Scotland after the Highland clearances from the early 19th century, where whole families and whole villages were transferred and transshipped from the Highlands of Scotland to the New World, to Canada, and to Australia in particular. The genesis of these works is in these little postcards which I used as postcards that were sent by specific people, or to specific people rather, who had been cleared, and these are historically accurate people. And then I built it up with other images, Gaelic text, with photographs. This, in fact, is a photograph of relatives of mine women who went down to work in service in Glasgow and had their own sort of mini form of immigration, in that they went there not willingly, but in order to help the economy at home. So the whole series is based on, has within it the immigration ship. This is an old drawing of an immigration ship describing the parts. Technically it's made up from collage, from found objects, from laser transfers, using resin, using wax, and using pigment. These works are called Atlantic Messengers, and they're based on the ideas that I have read about the inhabitants of the island of St Kilda. St Kilda was a small island 60 miles off the coast of Scotland on the northwest coast, which was evacuated in the 1930s. But the people there lived a particular and a very interesting life, living largely almost exclusively from the land and from seabirds. And these pieces are really a homage to them. They have got titles which refer to different islands in the island group, and within them they're the text of a poem that was written by one of the island bardesses rather. Within the text, these casts here, these are actually cast from eggs that were given to me as a child that had been collected on St Kilda. So they're guillemot's eggs that have been cast, and elements of fulmar and elements of puffin have been included within them. The other aspect of them is that they refer to a habit that the St Kilda people had. There was no radio contact with St Kilda, so they communicated through what they called the St Kilda mailboat. They made a wooden boat and put their message inside it and attached it to large bladders, and at the appropriate wind and tide it floated onto the mainland of the Outer Isles. So again, there's a reference within the eggs and the boat shape to this means of communication. Again, technically they're made from wood, from bone, from resin, text, and found objects. This piece here refers to the habit of collecting fulmar oil. Fulmar oil was used by the people as a cure for medication, a cure for all kinds of reasons within their culture. So this little bottle here has that kind of reference. This work, this installation is called the Painted Museum, and it's called the Painted Museum because it deals with the Picts, and the Picts, the Romans' name for the Picts was the painted people. I've always been fascinated by the Picts and by Pictish symbols, Pictish symbolism. There's not very much left of Pictish art except the Pictish stone carving. And in this work, I invented a number of images that were printed onto ceramic and fired in various ways to give a memory of perhaps another way of using material within that culture. And a number of fairly enigmatic objects that might have been used by the culture. I think as an artist you have the luxury and the liberty to invent ideas within cultures where the archaeologists have to stick to rigid fact. So I don't mean to make imitation Pictish things, but I wanted to play around with the idea of other aspects that we might not know about within the culture. The big panels are again panels of Pictish symbols which I took from old books, scanned in a particular way so that I felt they looked like an old-fashioned film strip, and then printed out onto rubber, and then they were rolled up onto the clay, and the clay was fired and glazed. And so these panels are related along this wall, and the smaller objects. And bronze cast. These are bronze cast pieces. These are carved from soapstone, and the rest of them are fired with ceramics and glazed. Artists working in the 20th century have the luxury of using new technology and adapting it to their purposes and using it in conjunction with an older technologies or well tried and used technologies. So being able to take images, put them onto a computer, to be able to work with them in Photoshop, to be able to rescan them and then to build them either three-dimensionally or two-dimensionally and adapt them to bronze cast here, to printing there, to casting on the other pieces here, is a way that artists use materials and use all the new developments within new technology. The title of this installation is Cod Requiem. On a visit to Newfoundland, I had an exhibition there in St. John's in Newfoundland. My wife, who's a painter also, Marion Leven, spotted these cod hooks, cod jiggers, in a junk shop. And it seemed to be quite a sad image because the Newfoundland cod industry has disappeared and the people are no longer allowed to fish for cod. And these wonderful old objects have been consigned to attics and junk shops. So I used them as a kind of metaphor, really, for the change of the fishing industry in Newfoundland, which has its parallels with all other coastal fishing cultures, and particularly in Scotland as well. So the original hooks here were cast in bronze to make them into a more kind of dramatic and symbolic art object. And then further cast in porcelain to represent a more decorative element, because the hooks themselves can also be bought in craft shops in Newfoundland as craft objects. So there's a change. I hope that the change in the culture would be represented in that kind of journey of the cod hook. And they do tie with, we extended that, Andy Rice and myself, into the film piece which you will see, which animates this creature and describes the journey that it makes from the surface of the sea down to its eventual resting place.
Initially, when Will approached me about the collaborative piece, it actually came about through chance. He was working with another member of staff within the Visual Research Centre, and they were having some problems on how they can interpret some of the pieces. And through a chat and a chance meeting, really, the resulting piece came about. And initially it was just to be just two-dimensional static pieces with a variety of textures applied to the fish that Will had already found and dug up on Newfoundland, which were the basis of a good part of the show. And these were the bronze casts and so on that you can see in the gallery today. Now, the initial scans and so on that we did to try and do interpretations of what the textures would be in terms of Will's work were soon evolved into another dimension in terms of 3D, and this was an option we'd explored. And the more we looked at this, it soon became apparent that this was the way to go. In doing that, we found a huge amount of inspiration in Will's work, and complementing that, we then went around the Tayport Harbour and so on and sourced a number of pieces in terms of digital textures and so on, and it could be barnacled pieces, maybe wood, it was hulls of ships, it was wet pieces of wood, it was dry pieces of wood, a variety of those. And we stocked all those, and from there the piece evolved into what it is. And basically it's a very simple process of taking a lot of these textures, and once you've created the wire frame, it's mapping them on to create the effects or the desired effect for the pieces. Now, interestingly enough, a huge inspiration on the piece was a year ago. I had travelled to South Georgia, which is part of the Falkland Islands and so on, and the Southern Territories. And on travelling down there, we were based on the HMS Endurance, the research ship, and that was very inspirational, and that's where a lot of the modelling came from. And it was, the reason it was very inspirational was I worked alongside scientists and so on. I was given access to a lot of material. I could stand on the deck of the ship and look at all this wildlife and travel through some quite ferocious oceans at that time as well. And the imagination runs wild as to what's going on below there. So that was very inspirational in the piece you see today as well. The narrative in the piece is really about the journey and how we imagined it. I personally felt it was almost like a Jules Verne journey, and there's great depths and the imagination and trying to encapsulate what this particular piece, when it becomes organic, would feel. And in the journey, as you can hear with the sound and the dullness and the introduction of the fisherman just above water at the beginning was part of this journey as it gets deeper and deeper. And the narrative being that when it passes all these other organic creatures, these creations, and trying to imagine what they were, what they would form, what their basis would be, how it would react with them, it just lent itself to a kind of a wild journey, and we hope that's what's came through in the piece anyway. Well, Will, oddly enough, had never used technology before, and I think I'm qualified enough to say that he's embraced it, and we hope that again comes through in the context of Will's work, and it complements what's actually happening there. The technology is fairly, I mean, it's general three-dimensional packages. I think the art of it is to, without going too photorealistic, which is not what we wanted, is to create this kind of ambiguity, again in the context of Will's work. And the secret of that was to get the maps right, the mapping. And in terms of the mapping, what happens there is we will create a three-dimensional model, which is a wire frame. And from there, we can take a variety of digital stock that we've created. And these were done by travelling around the harbours of Fife and so on, and predominantly at Taport, and collecting a variety of material, and essentially taking those and mapping them on in different forms onto the fish. So it's a relatively simple process, but the art is getting all the animation at the proper frame rates and the technicalities there to get a suitable outcome. The soundtrack, again, had to reflect the mood of the piece. Will had some audio that he'd taken, I think it was early 70s, about 73, when he was on the fishing boats. And it was of these older fishermen and so on, very much seafaring men. And he had this immense collection of audio, which we then took, and quite a bit of distortion, and a bulk of the soundtrack, apart from the ambient background, is made up from these fishermen talking. So it was quite inspirational and very valuable to Will, from his point of view, that we used that material, which he was always unsure of what he would do with at some time.